Leadership isn't all about having the answers. It's just about showing up. It's about learning and creating an environment where others can thrive. And I would suggest for anybody who's in a new leadership role, a management position role, and I had to learn this too, observe, listen, watch. Just see how your team operates, see how they operate within the ecosystem of the whole company, see how they operate amongst each other. So instead of asking, am I good enough as a leader, I get them to flip it and ask, am I willing to put in the effort to grow into this role?
I'm Damon Lemby, and this is the Learn It All podcast, the show for leaders who know that lifelong learning can be your ultimate advantage. Joining me today is Quinn Magnuson, a two-sport Division I athlete and former pro football player who had a really difficult childhood. He grew up in a single-parent home, and he realized early on that your effort was really the only thing you could control. Now today, Quinn is the founder and host of Effort Over Results. He's a keynote speaker, he's a coach, and he works with high-performing leaders and helps them understand that there's more to life than perfection and how to overcome your fear so you can be the type of leader that your team trusts and know that you have their back. In our conversation, you're going to learn why doubt and imposter syndrome aren't signs of weakness. They're actually signs of great leadership. We break down how shifting your focus to effort, not outcomes, will help build real confidence and true sustainable success. And Quinn's also going to explain why fear is almost never real and how action will beat anxiety every time. So Quinn, a lot of times when people step into the first management role, they're really thinking to themselves, am I even capable of doing this? When you start coaching somebody like that, who feels that way, what's the first thing you say or do with them?
Yeah. And, I commented on another podcast about this, that I would suggest that middle management is probably the toughest job in any company, especially in corporations, because you've got the pressure from up top to perform and to make sure your team performs. But then you also have a team that you're trying to lead and to grow. And if you don't lead them in the way that the C-suite above you wants you to, or wants you to lead, it can become a bit of a clash. And so you're stuck between this rock and a hard place. But if someone ever said, I don't know if I'm really cut out for this role, first and foremost, as a coach, I would ask them, like, why do you feel this way? It's the number one thing a coach needs to ask somebody when they start having doubts about themselves, when they start having that imposter syndrome. I would say, why do you feel this way? Because the reasons behind that really tell us where the growth needs to happen. Okay. But if I were to just tell them something, I would say, feeling doubt is actually a sign that you're going to be a good leader. Because the people who never question themselves are usually the ones who end up struggling. And so leadership isn't all about having the answers. It's just about showing up. It's about learning and creating an environment where others can thrive. And I would suggest for anybody who's in a new leadership role, a management position role, and I had to learn this too, observe, listen, watch. Just see how your team operates, see how they operate within the ecosystem of the whole company, see how they operate amongst each other, ask questions, show genuine compassion and interest in what they're doing. It doesn't have to be that command control like we talked about before the show, where you go in, you basically go, okay, this is where we're not hitting our KPIs and metrics. We need to improve that. This is what I'm changing. Because immediately you're going to lose the room, right? As we say in coaching, you're going to lose the room. So instead of asking, am I good enough as a leader, I get them to flip it and ask, am I willing to put in the effort to grow into this role? Okay. And so that shift from proving yourself to improving yourself completely changes the pressure that they feel and really unlocks their ability to lead authentically.
No, I love that answer, especially around, getting to know and observing. One of the things I would add to that is, if you got this role, if you're either promoted into it or you're just a candidate, you got it, stop worrying about whether or not you want to be there, because other people believe in you enough to give you that opportunity. And now it's like you said, now it's put in the effort, put in the work, and everything we'll talk about. So a question I have for you, going back, and we'll talk about your whole sports, because that's where you and I really connect. When you first stepped onto a college field or even maybe pro, did you ever have those moments where you're like, what am I doing here? I mean, looking around, like everybody is better than me. I can't even believe that I'm out on the field with these people.
I'll tell you a story that will illustrate that very well. So I grew up in a small city in Saskatchewan, Canada, called Saskatoon. And at the time when I was in high school, the city was maybe 100,000 people. Now, people might think that's fairly large, but I'd say that's small. And I played for, a high school team that within our league, there was maybe 150 people at our games. That's how big this, the fans in the stands were. So when I got my scholarship to Washington State and I made the starting 53 my freshman year, true freshman year, we ran out for our first game and it was actually at BYU. And like 72,000 screaming Mormons, basically. We ran out onto the field and I looked up and I fell over, actually tripped over my feet because I was looking up and staring at such a crowd I'd never seen before. And for me, that was the real first question of like, oh my gosh, if they put me in this game, I'm gonna, am I ready for this, right? And then you get into the game and you get that first hit and you kind of just, you figure it out. The second leap was obviously going from college to pro. Now, interestingly enough, playing pro in Canada, the crowds are somewhat smaller than what we played in front of in college. But the pressure to win for these organizations to win for you as a player, because they're paying you to stay on the roster. And once again, the Canadian Football League isn't like the NFL where there's millions of dollars being thrown around.
It's still pro. I don't care what anybody.
It's
still
absolutely,
pro.
and it's still a fantastic league. It's been around for 125 years. But the pay is different, right? And it's not just the hype, but still the pressure is there to win because these organizations, need winners to get sponsorships and money. And that was the other one. But I would say that, I've kind of felt that imposter syndrome my entire life, and I think what that goes back to, Damon, is, going back to my single mother upbringing. So my mom raised three of us basically in poverty on welfare. And I felt like my entire life was trying to prove to other people that we were good enough to just be, to exist. When you grow up with no money and your friends who do have money kind of like, we never had anyone over to our house because we didn't want to show them that we were poor. We always tried to, dress nicely because we're trying not to give other people the impression that we didn't have money. But that translated into my drive and effort into everything that I did was like, I didn't want to show up with, a used baseball glove. So I would earn the money to get a new baseball glove. We tried to always prove ourselves. And I think that helped. And I think if you talk to a lot of people who have succeeded in life, there's that one thing from their childhood, from their past that kind of drives them, right? And I think that's where, where I am with everything that I do is that I want to try to prove that I can do this. And so getting back to your original question of, how did I get here? That imposter syndrome feeling, I feel it all the time. But I think it's natural and normal for people to feel that. I think if you go into things feeling like I deserve to be here and I should be here, and you have this arrogance and ego, it's not going to serve you very well. And more often than not, that's people who are probably not fit for the role, right? I think you do need a little bit of humility. You do need a little bit of imposter syndrome just to make you work that much harder to be successful, whatever you do. But it's all about the effort.
Yeah, I mean, I think we all suffer from imposter syndrome, and you and I talk about this on your awesome show, Effort Over Results. And if you don't, you're either a sociopath or you're just fooling yourself. And I, even fear to a degree, I think it's good because it shows that you really care and it's something that you want to get done. So when that fear hits you in the face, Quinn, what is the first thing somebody should do?
The thing that I've been really working on the last couple of years, and now that I've worked with my kids and then even with the clients I work with, is asking them, is this fear really real? Because we as humans go straight to making things up in our mind about what the future might look like, about past traumas that now have formed our opinions and beliefs of this situation to be fearful of it. And that was my life in a nutshell. Once again, I grew up in a family where my mom felt the whole world was out to get us. And so we were constantly fearful of the government. We're constantly fearful of the healthcare system. We're constantly fearful of teachers and educators. And I had to get out of that. But it's only been recently that being able to walk through fear has been something I've been able to coach others through. And so if I was meeting with a client or meeting with someone who had a fear, I would get them to describe it and face it head on, but then I would ask them, Okay, so how much of what you described has actually happened? How much of what you have described is true? And a lot of times you have to take them from that microcosm of thought that they're in, that they're just so fixated on, and you got to pull the timeline out, you got to pull the picture out, and you gotta just say, okay, what are my strengths? What are my weaknesses that I can work on? And is this truly a fear? Or is this just me knowing that I can do the job, but I need to prepare and do more to be successful at it? Fears are, it's so funny, Damon, because I think we talk about fear as something that's like scary. And I don't think fear is scary. I think fear means that it's a good sign. I really do. I really think having a fear in something, really, it's a good sign, because it means you want to know more about it. It means you feel like you need to prepare for something. And I think it also is something that it's unique. It's change. It's something that you're not used to, but it helps you grow. And I mean, the old adage is like, face your fears. I mean, the reason why that cliche has stuck around for decades is because it's true. I think it's important for people to, but you have to give it a name. You gotta face it. You gotta give it a name, and you gotta ask yourself, how much of this is actually true? How much of this am I making up in my head? Okay, what can I do effort wise to go through that fear, literally go through it, and then understand that you can't control anything else around that. You can't control the people that are involved maybe in that situation. You got to let God and the universe figure it out after that. All you can do is put in your attitude and effort. So that's the thing with fear, is that I was fearful, and a lot of my success has come out of fear. And once again, it took me 50 years to look back on this and go, every time I've been successful, it's something that I feared, but I knew that effort and hard work would get me through it.
Was there ever a time, as you reflect back, where you look at a specific situation and you wish you would have handled it differently?
Mm. Yeah. I mean, many, but I would say here's a good example. When I became a high school teacher, this would have been back in 2000. My whole goal was to not let the kids take advantage of me. Because I had just come out of professional football, got my degree. I was going to be that hard-nosed teacher that got kids to learn. And my classroom was going to be almost like a military setting where there was no noise and everybody followed the rules. And I was going to give them lots of work and lots of homework. It took me 5 years of teaching and leaving teaching to look back on that and say they weren't learning. The kids who were the A students were going to get A's no matter what I put in front of them. The kids who were the 60 to 75, 80 students were the kids who were just keeping their heads above water and working fairly hard to get those grades. And the kids who were failing are the kids who I really failed, in the sense that I needed to spend more time with them. Now, the education system doesn't allow for that very, very well. It doesn't allow for one-to-one teaching. But here's what I regret. And this is what I teach business owners now. If you have an employee that, for lack of a better term, is acting up or isn't producing or is, an abnormal amount of sick days, they just seem off and they're not producing in the role that they're in, your first instinct should not be to A, fire them, or B, put them on, performance review, or C, basically go to them and give them a lecture about how they're not performing. Because that's what I did with my students. And I regret doing that. And I've had conversation with 2 or 3 students now in the 20 years after, where they came to me, and one of them actually confronted me on Facebook directly and said, you were a real hole on, as a teacher. I was basically living, in a house where my parents were drunk every night. There were parties on the weekend. I was being abused. And like, do you think I gave a crap about my homework? And it like a gut punch, Damon. It just killed me to hear that, because I look back on then my entire 5-year teaching career going, how many more other kids felt like this? And I know there were other kids that I treated that way, because I felt that my goal as a teacher was to keep them in line, get them to get good grades so they can go on to university. And it took me leaving teaching to look back and go, man, I mishandled that completely wrong. I should have sat down with that kid and said to them, Why are you sleeping in class? Are you getting enough sleep at home? Like, what's going on in behind the scenes? And understood, and compassion and empathy. And this is what business owners need to do now. And some of them do, and they're changing, and it's awesome to see. And some of them have always done it, and that's great to see. But there's still some out there that feel like, listen, you're my employee. I pay you a paycheck. You have a job to do. If you're not going to do it, you're either going to get fired or demoted or whatever. That's what we need to get away from. We need to have compassion and empathy for our employees, so that just like those students I had, so that they can perform knowing they have a psychologically safe workplace.
I think it's really ironic this story is coming up. I was speaking to a cousin of mine, and she was sharing with me about her fourth grade daughter is in a class, and the teacher is very hard nosed. It's all very growth mindset, but either doesn't like her daughter for some reason, but it doesn't show any kind of warmth or love towards the kid. And what's frustrating to my cousin is that, for instance, her daughter really likes math, right? But she's losing that because the teacher's saying, hey, look, you're in the lowest group. You need to push yourself to get better, and doesn't have a lot of sensitivity to it. So what I'm hearing you say is that's kind of like almost like what you were when you're teaching, but you would take a much different approach to make them feel better about themselves and give them confidence to try to work harder.
Yeah, I started doing that towards the end of my 5 years as a teacher, right before I left teaching. But I said to my wife, I've said this to many people over the next 20 years, if I ever went back to teaching, I would be a completely different teacher. Absolutely 180 degrees. It would be all about just that growth mindset. It would be about giving kids the time and opportunity to complete projects. Understanding there's still parameters. You still want to give kids deadlines and timelines. They need to learn life lessons. But man,
just like in leadership.
Yeah, exactly. The teachers, and this is the thing about EOR and effort over results, Damon, is that it's not just for the workplace or the corporate, environment. This is for teachers in classrooms. I recognize that in myself from my teaching days. This is for coaches and athletes. I recognize this from my sporting days. This is for parents and their own kids. If all you're telling your kids is basically they're only useful and that you only love them if they succeed and get 90s and get A's and gold medals, and that's their self-worth is based on that, sorry, you're a horrible parent. Sorry, if you're going to have some maybe a few of your audience members that hate me saying that, unpopular opinion, but it's true. Your kids, you want your kids to succeed, absolutely. If you're providing them with the resources and the opportunity to succeed, fantastic. But then you can't have the condition that if after providing them with all that, if they don't perform, that you either give up on them, or you basically just say, well, that was pointless, or, what the hell was this whole season all about? Because now that kid's basically going, oh, okay, I get it. I'm only lovable or worth something if I win, if I succeed. It reminds me of that scene from The Breakfast Club when Emilio Estevez is, talking about his dad, and it's like, your attitude is right? We want winners in this family. And that's what we need to move away from, is that you still want your children to and your students and your employees to be successful, but don't focus only on the results. Recognize the effort.
Recognize the effort, because Quinn, you can go through, whether you're coaching a soccer team or whatever it is you're doing, if you don't win the championship, it doesn't mean that the whole season is a loss. There's far from it. There's a lot of learning opportunities in there for growth. And the same thing goes with your sales team. You might lose a big RFP, but hey, what can you learn from that to do differently next time? Was there somebody in your life, or that either a coach or somebody that you really think back on and it's like, hey, this person played a pivotal role in my life?
Yeah, I talk about it in the book a little bit, but I would suggest that there were three people that were really pivotal in my life. And not having a father figure, I leaned on my grandfather when I was younger, and he was the one who said, the devil makes work for idle hands, and you got to put hard work into everything. But if I didn't succeed, like if I wasn't the best baseball player on the team or hockey or whatever, he didn't care about that. He just wanted to make sure I was working hard. And so I think that's where a bit of that effort over results seed was planted. And he passed away when I was playing pro ball in 1996, and so that heavily affected me. The second person by far was my track and field coach. He was the Canadian national track and field throws coach for shot put and discus, and he was assigned to me as my coach in 1980, 8, when my senior year in high school. And, when we talk about the people who are our favorite coaches, teachers, and adults in our childhood, it's not necessarily the ones you learned the most from or you had the most success under. It's the ones that made you feel important, made you feel supported, that really helped you grow. And Bishop Delegowitz was his name. He was the Canadian national shot put champ back in the 70s. He coached me for 3 years, and he gave me confidence. He wanted me to succeed. Don't get me wrong. We wanted to win. And I made the national junior team for 3 years, went to world championships, 88 through 90. But he became my second father. And it was because I just truly knew that he cared beyond the shot put circle and beyond the practices and everything. He cared, and he saw a kid who, kind of grew up a little bit on the wrong side of the tracks and didn't have a father figure, and he took on that role for me. The third would probably be my high school football coach, who, in most people's eyes, and if you mention this name in football circles where I come from, he's kind of a hard-nosed jerk to some people. But if you worked hard, he treated you properly, right? But I think, going into any great detail, I think we're all shaped by those teachers, those coaches, the parents, maybe an aunt or uncle, older cousins, I don't know, that just, they made you feel like you existed. And that's really what people want. When we talk, it's Maslow 101. It's psychological safety is the foundation for everything. We want to know that when we go into a situation, on a team, in a classroom, in our own families, in a workplace, that we're safe. And once again, this isn't woo-woo kumbaya stuff. This is truly just human psychology. And so everyone has those stories about that great teacher, that great coach, that, their mom or dad, like what they did for them. And that was me. Like I said, I didn't have a lot growing up. My mom did her best. So I had to rely on other people to try to guide me through all of that. And to be honest, Damon, I don't know what in me, because I wasn't overly athletic. I was athletic enough, but I was the big chunky kid, right? I was a big kid. And I don't know what got into me that I felt like I had to be successful at sports to somehow prove myself. But I was like, oh, I'm kind of good at this. I guess I'll keep trying at it. And then ultimately in the end, going on to play pro and stuff. But I think today, and I see it, especially as a Canadian observing the United States, that the United States still very much is a dog eat dog, win at all costs, environment. And you see, 8-year-old Pop Warner football players, beating the crap out of each other on the field, and coaches losing their minds because they're not winning. And it's like, we need to dial this back, because all we're creating is just conflict, right? So yeah, I like I said, I'd say probably my grandfather and Bishop Delegowitz were my two biggest influences in who I am today. My wife has changed who I am. We're influenced by people, and that's why I love conversation.
We are influenced by people. And for our listeners out there, I want you to take a second and reflect back on people in your life who made you feel like you could do it, or gave you confidence, or made you even stretch you to see that you had talent before, even more so than you even believed in yourself. And I think that that's really, whether you're a coach, a parent, or a leader, a business leader, that's what I think you should strive for. So with that being said, Quinn, how can your philosophy around effort over results and the work you do, how can you help create leaders like that?
Going back to my comment at the start of the show about middle management being the toughest role in a company, and I still believe it is. You're caught between the rock and the hard place of producing KPIs and metrics for the leadership team and for the company as a whole, but you're also wanting to make sure that your team wants to follow you and really wants to feel like you're growing them. And that's such a tough place to be, because you have eyes on you from the top and eyes on you from the bottom. And depending on the culture of the company is really what determines your success as a manager. If the culture of the company coming from the top down is very, once again, like I said, command control, it's KPI driven, it's results driven, it's all about shareholder, value going up, profitability, results. Your job as a middle manager is almost, unless you're like them, is basically it's a no-win situation. And I'll tell you why. Because if you're not like them, but you can get results through more of a compassionate, empathetic leadership role and the way you handle people, your team may produce, but it may not be to the level of results that the team above you wants. And so I think it's just really important for leaders to know that you're not a leader because you're leading through the results of things. It's not about the KPIs. It's the conversations around the KPIs. And Dr. G.V. Saran was on my show last week, and she said that. So I'm going to give her credit for that quote. It's not about the KPI. It's about the conversation around the KPI. And she said, every company needs to have goals that they're shooting for, KPIs, metrics, and so forth. But she said the conversation, once those results come in, doesn't need to be around the number itself. It needs to be around, okay, why didn't we hit this mark? How do we help our team? How do we provide a better, psychologically safe environment? And going back to your question earlier about those people that, like, here's the example I want to give, Damon. You've probably heard this before. Man, that was a coach that I'd run through a brick wall for. Remember, have you ever said that about someone?
100%. That,
Yeah.
or, the other one that I always strive for from people is when somebody says, Damon was a leader or a coach that I didn't want to let down.
Okay, there you go. And yeah, exactly. It's the exact same thing. I like using the run through a brick wall for, because it's football players, right, who are dumb. But I think about the people in my life that I've used that statement for. And it was my high school football coach, Bishop Delegowitz, my track coach. I mean, my grandfather, but that's family. But I'd say in leadership, even as a teacher, or even in my corporate job, there's only one or two there that I would say that about. And okay, why would I say that about that person? Because they made me feel invincible. They made me feel like I could do things, make a mistake, and they wouldn't come down on me hard. They would walk me through it. They would coach me through it. And they'd be like, that's okay. Don't worry about it. We're going to get it back. We're going to coach you through that. We're going to learn from the mistakes. And here's the thing, Damon. You and I, when we preach our philosophies, we're not telling anybody anything that's new. These philosophies have been around for decades. It's just now only come to the forefront because of the employment situation, because of the economy, because of just pure conflict in our culture. But it's those people you'd run through a brick wall for because they made you feel, first and foremost, psychologically safe. You knew when you walked into work in the morning or into that classroom or onto that field or the ice that you were in an environment where you could be yourself. You could, say what you needed to say. You could even question coaches, teachers, employers, and you could work hard and go 110%, but make a mistake, and that was okay. And I used to tell all the athletes I ever worked with, especially football players, I said, I don't care if you make a mistake, but make it at 100 miles an hour. And what I meant by that was put all your effort into everything you do, because I can dial you back. I can't push you to work harder, but I can dial you back to that fine spot where you're going to find your success. And so that's the people in our lives. So I don't want to talk about just about me, but the people in our lives that we would run through that brick wall for, the ones you didn't want to let down. Mom and dad, that special high school teacher or coach, that employer that I'm working for minimum wage, but man, I'll stay here and work another year for this person.
Can you teach that drive though? Is that or is that innate? Because like you said right there, it's okay to make mistakes, but make mistakes going 100 miles an hour. Is there a way to help teach that drive for people who may not come into the role having it?
Yeah, here's what I believe about that. I think there are children, and then ultimately they become students, and then athletes and employees and whatever. There are people who are born with drive. It just comes from the upbringing that they had in their home or whatever. And you and I have coached kids, right? We see them. We don't have to tell this kid his motor's running 100 miles an hour. We got it. Okay, they've got it. But how do you get those kids who don't have that motor? The reason why they don't have that motor is because of the environment that they grew up in. It's because of past experiences where they maybe tried to do something, they were yelled at, they were told they did it wrong, or so those people, kids, students, athletes, whatever you want to call them, they need a little bit longer to figure that out. But it's never going to happen, once again, if they don't feel safe in the environment they're in. So the team they're on, the classroom they're in, the family they're in, the employment situation they're in. So you got to provide that for them first. You've got to let them take baby steps. and celebrate the small wins. For some people, I had one. Here's a good example. On our 12-year-old football team I was coaching with my son. Well, my son had a motor. That was no problem. I had one kid who didn't want to hit anybody. And I said, okay, my son, his name was Leif. I said, Leif's going to stand there. I want you to run at him and tackle him. You get a free shot at him. He kind of he hugged him. I'm like, and I applauded his effort for doing that. I said, great, let's work on that. And then he saw that he could do it and not hurt my son. That would never happen. and that I praised his effort. And then he did a little more and he did a little more. And here's the thing, Damon, by the end of the season, it's not like he became an all-star player, but he was 60, 80, 100% better than he was at the start of the season. So you're right. There are people who don't have it. They weren't born with it. And that has to do with childhood trauma. That has to do with past experiences, has to do with their upbringing. It comes, but it takes longer. It's like, are leaders born? The age-old question, are leaders born or are they created? Both. I think some people are just born and immediately they're thrown into an environment at the age of 2 or 3 when they can speak and talk and understand and listen as to what leadership really looks like. And then they carry that on through their teen years and so forth. And then there's other people who've never had that, but then they figure it out as they get older. So there is no answer to that question. It really is just they need more time, growth mindset. They need more time, maybe more resources, and they need a nurturing environment that will allow them to make those mistakes and not be chastised for it.
And what you're saying too is it's about activity and action. You know, you got to keep getting in the reps.
Yeah, activity. I actually said this to my daughter last night. She was struggling, and I go, listen, action beats anxiety. Number one, action beats anxiety. If you're just going to sit there and stew over this stuff, you're going to get worse.
So talk to us a little bit more about how does that look? How does that activity beat anxiety? Because that's a great saying, by the way. I'm going to steal that. So
yeah, action beats anxiety. It's scientific. This isn't woo-woo BS. It's scientific. The brain has in the frontal cortex an area called the AMCC, the anterior mid-cingulate cortex. And now I'm sounding like I'm Andrew Huberman, but it is an area of the brain that wants to be challenged. So when you sit and do nothing, it dwindles away and it goes away. When you do so, and that's when the other areas of the brain can start to think and create bad thoughts. When you challenge yourself, even if it's just going for a walk, you're changing your environment, one, which is positive. So if you're ever having a depressed moment, an anxious moment, or whatever, action and movement and a change of environment, I'm not saying it's going to cure you. I'm saying it's going to certainly help your situation. Staying in one spot in the same environment where the depression or the anxiety is happening is not good. It's no different than simple as if you have an anxiety attack in the banquet room you're in for an event, and you go outside just to have a deep breath. You've changed your environment. You've moved. You've gotten your body moving. Maybe you walk a little more. That's going to help. But anytime, and I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a doctor. I've just learned from years of experience and actually from my daughter experiencing this, and she finally admitted it to me. Because she wouldn't for years. But she goes, now when I feel like crap or I'm having an anxious moment or I'm depressed, she goes, I go to the gym. She goes, it fixes everything. And it's the chemicals in our body. It's what the brain chemicals are doing and everything. It just makes you feel better about the situation. It also opens up your eyes to the bigger picture that a lot of people don't do. They sit and they dwell and they stew in it. And that's not good. So action beats anxiety.
Yeah, let's switch gears a second. And you work with a lot of different types of organizations. And looking at the successful ones, what do successful corporate clients that you work with have in common to some of the sports teams that you've played on that's been super successful?
Yeah, great question. And I would say 2 things. One, it's in the culture. And what I mean by culture is that there is a very definitive value proposition in the company, and their value statements mean something, and they project them every day. They don't just have them up on a wall and then it's just a virtue statement, okay? Or virtue signaling. Their mission is clear. The roles and responsibilities of each individual employee is clear as to what their job is. And I want to do an aside here. It's no different than when I walk into a classroom. If the kids don't think I'm prepared and they're not quite sure what's going to happen that day, they lose their minds.
Trust.
They lose trust and they lose their minds, and it turns into a zoo. Same thing with your own children at home. Same thing with the team. But I would say number one, clearly defined roles and responsibilities. Make sure everybody, and transparency in that. Make sure everybody understands what their role is and how they collaborate with others. Okay. The second thing is providing that environment where people feel like they can be themselves. So it's a bit of a dichotomy in the sense that you have, here's your role, here's exactly what we need you to do, here's what we're expecting in terms of KPIs and metrics. And once again, folks, I'm not downing metrics and results and KPIs. You still need to have them. What is measured is managed, right? It's an age-old business saying. But then you need to trust the people you hired will do their job. Trust them. Don't micromanage. Don't look over their shoulder. Don't comment on every single thing they do, whether it be good or bad. Like just let them do their job. And I would say that when you take a look at some of the best championship teams, and I'll use Tom Brady's New England Patriots for, huge dynasty for over a decade. Guys like Wes Welker, Rob Gronkowski, some of the old linemen that played, I can't even remember half of them. But basically they were all role players. They weren't Pro Bowl caliber necessarily, but they fit into the system that was Bill Belichick's pro football system. He wanted specific types of players, specific attitudes of players, and he went out and he handpicked who he wanted on his team. I remember the Chicago Blackhawks run of the mid-2010s. Sure, you had your Patrick Kane, your Jonathan Toews, but for the most part, they were role players. Everyone understood their role. Michael Jordan's Bulls. Dennis Rodman was brought in specifically just to rebound, okay? Same thing goes with companies. You can't have a roster of all-stars. You need diversity. You can talk about DEI in that way, but you need people who all specifically play a role and understand that is their role. But then you need to let the team come together through that culture of psychological safety and growth mindset. That's really what builds a great team. And all the best teams that I've ever been on were cultures where, man, I couldn't wait to get back to work, or I couldn't wait to get back to practice on Monday, because I just love being around those other people. I love the coaches that I had, and we all knew that we were going to succeed because we love being around each other. And that's where that psychological safety comes in, is that you can have companies and corporations that are hyper successful, but I would suggest that the majority of them that have long-term sustained hyper success are the ones where the people there just love going to work there. And that's what Google did with the Aristotle project. That's what Pixar did back in the 1990s, early 2000s. That's what Patagonia did. It's all been proven that culture and that psychological safety and having people understand exactly why they're there, and when you hired them and their role, but then creating that psychologically safe environment, it's a recipe for success.
Yeah, and what I hear you saying is surround yourself with diverse talent. Don't bring on everybody who's a A-type personality who do things all the same way and always agree with each other on everything. Have a diverse group and tap into their strengths. And that's important to know as a leader, because you can't have all the answers all the time. You shouldn't. You need to be able to figure out who on your team you need to go to have who would be best. And are you a believer, Quinn, that people should work on improving their strengths, or figuring out what their weaknesses are and focus on those and get better at that?
I think the answer to that one's pretty obvious. It's work on your weaknesses, maintain your strengths, obviously. But I mean, anytime I work with a business owner, I say to them, play to your strengths. Like, obviously do what you do best, hire to your weaknesses. So if when you're first starting up, generally it's QuickBooks or it's some sort of bookkeeping that's horrible and people hate doing it. I'm like, well, why are you spending 25 hours a week figuring out your QuickBooks charts every single night when you get home from the office? Hire someone else to do that. That'll strengthen you.
Delegate that out.
Yeah. Same thing in sports. I would tell my football players, or even basketball, when I was coaching basketball, it's like, why are you working on something that you're already really, really, really good at? How about you get under the basket and work on your layups, because you're kind of not good at that. Work on your left-hand dribble because you're not good at that. So definitely work on your weaknesses and be willing to accept what those weaknesses are. recognize them and go, okay, this is what I'm working on. Everybody needs to work on that and maintain your strengths. It doesn't mean you ignore them. They're just saying, yeah, definitely work on weaknesses.
And how can somebody, whether a leader or somebody on your team, learn to get better at receiving feedback? I mean, that's something as an athlete, that's one thing we're great at because we get so much feedback. It's important to be able to do that, to even understand what those weaknesses are that you have.
There isn't anyone that really likes feedback if it's given in the wrong way. And people say, well, I'm just giving constructive criticism. No, you're just criticizing. Don't call it constructive. Don't mask it in constructive criticism. That's not the way to handle feedback. I think, and I'll stay in the corporate area, but when people have performance reviews, when they're given report cards, when their bonus is based on that and whatever, and I tell companies that I work with this, if you're going to bonus your people, you better have a damn good mathematical equation and report card for why they got that dollar amount. Because too many companies I know will go ahead and be like, oh, well, everyone gets $1,000 bonus this year. That's not the way you should be handling these things, because then this guy who slacked off and did nothing most of the year gets $1,000, and the person over here who busted their tail gets $1,000. Not the right way. So you definitely need to let your people know, how are they being measured? Number one, if there is any measurables at all. That's the other thing that companies make the mistake of. No performance reviews, no real measurables. Like does your sales team have a CRM goal they have to fulfill so many meetings a month? It's like, oh no, we just let them go out and sell. Oh my gosh. You got it. And this is funny because I'm kind of going against what people think my EOR is all about. It's like, no. We need results, KPIs, metrics. We need to know what we're being measured against. But then now let's just focus on, are you putting the effort towards getting those results? And that's really, where companies fail, is that they aren't clear in once again, roles and responsibilities. They're not clear in the measurables. They don't explain to their team members as a group and also individually exactly what they're being measured against. But in the performance reviews, I go back to the comment I made earlier about the conversation is around the KPI, not the KPI itself. And so if you have someone who is high performer, I think there was a LinkedIn post, and this will best illustrate the answer to this question. There's what and there's how. The what is, what percentage of your revenue target did you hit this year? 92%. Great. How did you do it? Tell me about that. And I often got my students to write their own report cards. Tell me what you did in the classroom. Tell me about your projects. Tell me about the things you did. I tell my athletes, at one season, I had my athletes actually tell me, like, what do you want to work on for next season? What do you think you were good at? What do you need to, improve upon? And more often than not, Damon, people will be harder on themselves than you could ever be. And I think that's important. So for your staff, KPIs and metrics are good. But don't just focus on the 92%, revenue target. Just go, okay, tell me more about how you achieve that. Would you like to coach some of the other salespeople and how they can do that? Let's get together and let's work on that together. It's all about the how. But the thing is, people say, well, you can't measure how. No, you can't. I get it. You can't. It becomes very subjective. But at the same time, that's what you should be messaging to your people. A report card that reflects the what. Here are the hard targets you had to hit, but then a really good mix of the how, and let them tell you where they collaborated with others, the projects they worked on, the new innovative ideas they came up with. And man, you talk about productivity. This is what the corporate company that I worked for really worked on, was the hows. And I was like working so hard every year to collaborate with others, think of new projects, innovate new ideas. Because when you do all those things, the rest of it takes care of itself.
Yeah, what I like you're saying there, one is reflection, also self-awareness, which I think is one of the most important skills any leader, anybody could have. But also you're creating a culture of learning, really. And as a leader, you also need to be a hero maker instead of a hero. And so a hero maker opens the door and works on the how, because then you're getting people to really start thinking for themselves on how to get there and reflecting back and developing that muscle.
I think one of the best muscles a coach can develop is the question muscle. It's just constantly asking questions. Observe and ask questions. Observe and ask questions. And when if an employee, once again, a student, an employee, an athlete comes to you and asks a question, ask them basically the question back and go, what would you do in this situation? Or how would, I want to get your take on how you would improve our metrics in this area. Because man, people love when you ask their opinion, number one. And two, they really feel like you care about, what they think. And then they're bought in, and then they feel like they're part of the company's success or the team's success or their own success, is because you've asked them those questions. One of the best pieces of advice I got when my wife and I owned the 1-800-GOT-JUNK franchise, I told them, we were in the truck one day and my phone was nonstop ringing off the hook. And he goes, who are all these phone calls from? I said, well, it's from the team members. They want to know what to do in this. He goes, okay, next time a team member calls, he goes, the first thing I want you to ask him is, what would you do in this situation, Stefan? Or David or whoever the worker was. And I started, all of a sudden my phone stopped ringing a week later because I empowered them. I said, what would you do in this situation? They go, well, we think we should do this. Okay, great. Go with that. Really? Yeah, I trust you. So you're trusting them. And even if they make the decision and they make a little mistake, then you ask them, okay, you made that decision. What went well? What went wrong? Okay, would you do it differently next time? How would you do it differently? And you just grow. You can see their chests expand almost and their brains expand because you care about what they think. You're letting them figure it out for themselves, which grows that AMCC because they're being challenged. And they will become far more productive. And in the end, your company becomes more profitable. And this is what I don't get is the pushback from corporations that say that, stuff like, EOR or the philosophies that you bring or GD Saran's quantum business that I just interviewed, which is a little more soft, right? They'll call it soft. But that's what's producing productivity and profitability these days, not command and control.
No, absolutely. And talk about asking questions. I just interviewed a guy, the episode's out now, Jeff Wetzler, who wrote a book called The Ask Approach. And all is it's so important. And it talked about how if you're asking questions, especially open-ended questions, and you're listening and people are starting to feel heard, they're going to feel a better connection with you. And they're also going to start telling you things that maybe they wouldn't have told you before and things that they're really important. And in return, they're growing, especially when you set them up and empower them where they know that, hey, if they're going to try something, they make a mistake, hey, so be it, right? You're going to learn from that and grow. I don't think it's soft at all, Quinn. And speaking of books, let's pivot over here. Talk a little bit about your new book that's coming out any day now.
Yeah. So Effort Over Results, The Secret to Grit, Growth, and Greatness. I've been working on this for about a year and a half, almost 2 years. We're now in we're past editing. We're actually now in the publishing stage. The book should be coming out sometime, I'm believing now in November of 2025. So great for Christmas. But really it's a nice mix of personal anecdotes, personal stories about, raising my children and the mistakes I made with them. And really how EOR was born out of that is the mistakes I felt I made with my children. Not that I was a bad father. I just was like all about productivity and results. And I want my kids are much better now because I've told them, as long as you're putting the effort in, I'm good with that. But it's a nice mix. But then there's also separate full-on sections about EOR in the workplace, EOR in the classroom, EOR on the sports field, and EOR in your family. And it's because effort over results philosophy applies everywhere. This isn't, and you can apply the same principles of it everywhere. So going back to psychological safety, growth mindset, and effort recognition, if you apply that on the sports field, in a classroom with your own children, or in the workplace, it's all gonna benefit you and to be more productive and happier, really. But two, going back to what we were just talking about, Damon, asking, okay, well, whether it's your son or daughter, your athlete, your employee, or a student that comes up to you and says, what do I do in this situation? And you ask them, well, what do you think you should do? It's the easiest parenting hack I've ever learned, Damon. It truly is. It's like the kid feels empowered. They're learning from what the mistake they made. They're growing through it. And you kind of get off the hook for having to provide an answer, right? And it's awesome. I'm not saying it's easy, but I'm just saying it's some of the things we fear in terms of being a parent or a leader are some of have the easiest answers, but we don't want to use the easy answer because we think it should be complex. And it's really not. Leadership isn't really complex. And I hate to dumb it down for, for people like you and I that are trying to profess leadership. You can simplify it. And really, it's like you said, it's be the hero maker, not the hero. Be a listener, not a teller. Your goal by far should just be to grow other people in the right way, to empower them to make independent decisions. But we feel as adults and as leaders and as superiors that it's our job to mold them in our fashion, in the image of us. We're not God. We don't need to mold people in our image. We need to let them mold themselves into the best they can be. And that's what the book's all about.
No, I love that. And I think one of the things that's really important for our listeners out there, if you go into a leadership role and your mindset is to make it all about you, you're in it for the wrong reason. The best leaders, Quinn, are people first leaders. They're the ones who care about their people and want to see them succeed and want to win through them. And when I say win, win can just be give them confidence, give people confidence. If while they're working at your organization, they might be there for 2 years. And then maybe they move on, but you should be happy for them and proud for them because they put in the effort and have been able to move on. And it's so important. Let me ask you this as we kind of wrap up here. If you can wave a magic wand and fast forward 10 years from now, what would be the impact you'd like to see EOR make on the world when it comes to leadership? And leadership could be around parenting, teaching, corporate. Because at the end of the day, it's all kind of infused. It all, personal and professional is all together.
That's a great question. It's I think the impact that EOR and the philosophy of effort over results should leave is that, and whether people use that term, it's like, oh yeah, effort over results or EOR. I don't care. It's not about me and my brand. It's not about that. It's about the lasting result, the lasting effect. And I think the thing is that if everybody had the mindset to leave people better than when they found them, the world changes. But unfortunately, and as I said before, we live in a very competitive society. And that's where it kind of all falls apart. As soon as you incorporate win at all costs competition, don't get me wrong, I'm all about competition. I love competing. I love being challenged. But win at all costs competition creates division. But if you're a leader, whether you're a captain on a team, whether you're a teacher in a classroom, if you're leading 1 people or 100 people in the environment you're in, everything you do should be about them getting better and feeling better about themselves and them feeling safe around you. If you walk into the building and you notice people get a little stiff or kind of clam up, you're not a leader. Sorry, you're not. That's a leader should walk in and people should almost cheer them like Norm on Cheers, right? Sorry, old reference for you young people.
Hey, I got it.
You got it because we're old enough. But That's how people should feel. Like, when you say, well, man, when that person walks in the room lights up and everybody just loves being around that person. That's the type of leaders you want, is that other people feel good being around and that they can be their genuine, authentic selves. So as a leader, if EOR does anything, and I leave my mark on the sports field or with parents or with teachers or in the workplace, is that everybody who reads the book, everybody who takes on this philosophy, you try to leave people better than the way you found them. And it's really not that hard. You don't even need the book to do it. You just need to decide for yourself. It's not about me. It's about this person being better. My kid, my student, my athlete, my employee.
I like that. It's not about me. And I like what you said there. Help the people around you feel good or feel better about themselves, inspire them. And so tell us a little bit about your podcast and where everybody can connect with you at.
Yes, sir. So the EOR podcast can be found on YouTube. I'm very proud to say we just hit 1,000 subscribers. I know that doesn't sound like a lot, but man, it was a lot of hard work. We started in October of last year. So I guess you could say 10 months in, we're at 1,000 subscribers. We just hit 100,000 views, but it's been all about just the effort we put in. So YouTube, effort over results, you can search it there. We're on TikTok. I can't the Twitter account because really there's just not a lot going on there as far as stuff goes. There's just a lot of conflict and bad stuff on Twitter, X. The website is effortoverresults.com, so you can read about us there. Book comes out in November. On LinkedIn, we do have effort over results, but there's also my personal LinkedIn profile under Quinn Magnuson, which is where I do a lot of my posting about leadership and workplace environments and psychological safety. So I'm out there. I'm everywhere. And if you really Google search me, you're going to find my CFL career and my Arena Football League career and track career and everything. But yeah, it's been a wild journey, Damon. I left my corporate job to really throw myself fully into this because this isn't something I did as a side hustle. Now, this is something that I truly believe can change people's lives. And so I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show and to get the word out there.
Well, you've been fabulous. And so listeners, well, yeah, first of all, go check them out on Perplexity. I found some great old school pictures of you out there in your in your uni.
Hair.
Yeah. But listeners, what I want you to do is I want you to think about if you're leading a team or you're a parent or a coach, are you focusing on the effort people are putting in, or are you really hammering in the results? Okay. And if you're strictly results based, you need to self-reflect and think about what Quinn and I spoke about today. Because really, especially for people on your teams and your kids, make it about the effort because the results will end up happening. And what else I'd like you to do is go out and pick up Quinn's book and make sure you check out my episode with him that I'll put in the show notes as well. I had a great time and he's a great host. And until next time, everybody, stay curious, keep learning. Have a great day. Quinn, you're awesome. Thank you, buddy.
Thank you, Damon.
So Stephen, as you can see, refers to resistance as that voice in our head that's always with us. It could be arrogance. It could be limiting beliefs. It's always something that's showing up that's preventing us from doing what we want to do. And by the way,